evening, everyone, and welcome to our Bible Ponder for this week. Last week, we took a slight diversion away from the Gospel of Luke and the text of the Gospel, and we talked about different theories of atonement, as they're called, which is different ways of sort of intellectually thinking about how to answer the question, what do we mean when we say Jesus died on the cross for you? And we talked not exhaustively about all of those. I didn't cover everything, and I gave kind of a bit of an overview of them without giving you a lot of people or dates or things of them. But the basic rundown of them, I would really suggest you go back and rewatch that, or just watch it if you haven't had a chance to watch that yet. There are a few different ways of looking at the death of Jesus. One is what's called penal substitution or substitutionary atonement. And that is the idea that God is angry at sin. We are all really sinful beings, and there's no way to overcome this massive gulf of sin between us and God. And God must have some kind of punishment, but we can never fulfill that punishment. And so Jesus dies as a perfect sacrifice for us. And I talked about why I don't really like that way of thinking about it, not just because it sounds a bit angry and we're, maybe growing past that as human beings, but really intellectually and philosophically, there are problems with that. The idea that there's a God that's so angry, but Jesus is God. And so that way of thinking about it really separates Jesus and God, as if they're two very radically different beings, that God is angry and just and must have God's pound of flesh, and Jesus is loving and caring, and that seems really incongruous with God as the Trinity, as one whole being. There's also just that idea that the idea of just God being angry, but Jesus, as God revealed, shows us that that's not who God is, and God is not the God of the sacrificial system who's constantly demanding reparations for every little sin, but that God actually doesn't want sacrifice as much as God wants our hearts. And Jesus is the one who reveals that to us. And so the angry God who's craving blood and justice is exactly the God that Jesus reveals God not to be. And so I think to kind of regress to that way of thinking about God is to not take Jesus seriously. It's also a way of looking at the death of Jesus that really only takes into account Jesus's death and nothing about Jesus's life or teachings or anything like that. There's other ways where you look at it like a ransom, which is really similar to the substitutionary atonement, where there is a debt to be paid, but that Jesus pays that debt on the cross. And there's some similar problems with that to substitutionary atonement. Another problem with that is just then that's not forgiveness. That's just our debt being paid. If I owe a debt on, unpaid taxes to the government, and then someone pays that for me, the government hasn't forgiven my debt. They've just been paid. They've just been satisfied. So that's not forgiveness, and that's not the forgiveness of sins. So we talked about really the way that I think most thoroughly explains the death of Jesus and is most consistently biblical with texts like Philippians chapter 2 and the whole Christ poem that Paul shares with us, and a lot of the other theology that I think weaves its way throughout the whole Bible. But especially Jesus himself is the revelation of God, is this idea that Jesus' death is the ultimate example of love and the ultimate opening up of God's arms to humanity. And it's both an ethical example of how Jesus calls us to live as servants and putting others first and showing love and being sacrificial, but also that through his ultimate act of love and his death on the cross, as God dying on the cross, the curtain is torn in two. The gulf between human beings and God has been bridged through love, not through some kind of blood sacrifice, but through the ultimate show of compassion and solidarity and love between human beings and God, and God as a human being. So I think that's the way that I want us to kind of think about this and have in our minds now as we finish off Luke chapter 23 and get to the death of Jesus. As we go through this, I'll point out, and I've got over on my other laptop here, a bit of a gospel parallel just to remind us there's a lot of similarities, and you can see really clearly how the story in all four Gospels here really syncs up and is a lot of details are really shared. But some of the Gospels have some different details, and so I want to bring those out as we go. But we'll stick mainly in Luke. And I'm reading from the NRSV here. Verse 44. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, while the sun's light failed and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. So I think I've said before in a couple of videos that Luke doesn't have the tearing of the temple curtain. He does here, obviously. That's my mistake for saying that. Part of it is because Luke has it here in a slightly different place. The other Gospels who mention it have it at the end after Jesus has given up his spirit or proclaimed different things, that the temple is torn in two. But Luke has the temple being torn in two. But again, it's the same details, and these events are happening within hours, within minutes of each other. So it's mainly a change of storytelling. It's not a mistake. In the NRSV, it's translated as noon and 3 p.m. That's clearly for our benefit, the way that's worded there. It's literally the 6th hour and the 9th hour. That was the way they counted hours. And if you think about it, you're really thinking of the day from sunrise. And so if sunrise is about 6 a.m., 6 hours later is about noon, and that's when the sun's at its highest point, and then the 9th hour, and then the 12th hour, and you think about 12 hours in the day, and you split it into segments like that. So that's the way it's actually worded. In most other translations, I think, will maintain that 6th hour, 9th hour thing. And all four Gospels will mention the darkness for 3 hours there, starting at noon, while Jesus is being crucified. Then it says, Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. So Luke is the only one who gives us the words of Jesus here. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Matthew and Mark both record Jesus saying the Aramaic phrase, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? They also then, some other details that Luke does not record here, is the sponge dipped in vinegar and given to Jesus. Matthew and Mark both have that. But in John, who also has the detail of the sponge being handed up to him, John actually has Jesus asking for that specifically, or saying at least, I am thirsty, and then someone going to get it. But Matthew and Mark just record someone going to get it for him after he calls out. And then they say, oh, he's calling out for Elijah, and they run and get the drink. John also says it's on a hyssop branch, which again is that kind of imagery in John for Jesus as the Passover lamb. And hyssop was used to cleanse the temple. It was spread throughout the temple. So hyssop there for John is another meaningful detail. So he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, certainly this man was innocent, or literally, certainly he was a righteous man or a just man. And Matthew and Mark both have him saying, surely this man was the Son of God. And that is quite a title, and a title I would almost expect from Luke in his way of framing things in light of the Roman Empire. You would expect maybe the centurion to say, truly this was the Son of God. Is quite a powerful thing to have in his gospel. It's really framed in relief to the Roman Empire, but he has him saying he was a righteous man. Again, the centurion is still there saying something, and there are different accounts of different things. We all know how this works with recounting events. Really what stands out is not the details are different, but really how many details are the same, and how many little things in the span here of just a few hours. All four Gospels written in different communities at different times all record really, really faithfully. And I think it's incredible that they're actually as in sync as they are. When all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. The women are also characters who are mentioned in all four Gospels. All four Gospels go out of their way to really, really hammer home that while there's crowds there who are baying for Jesus' blood, Peter's already denied him and run away. The other disciples have scattered, the male disciples have scattered, but the women are there in both Matthew and Mark. We'll name them as Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, the mother of Zebedee's children. We also have Salome, and who's named, and John also mentions Mary, the wife of Cleopas, but Mary Magdalene is named by the other three Gospels there in Luke. But all four have the women there witnessing the death of Jesus. The other details that we have then in Matthew, we have a peculiar detail where the temple curtain is torn in two. So you can read it. So we have the sponge, and they give it to him, and then it just says, Jesus had cried again with a loud voice, yielding up his spirit, or giving up his spirit. So there's the same as Luke, except Luke actually has Jesus' words, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. But then the temple curtain is torn in two from top to bottom, not just torn in two. Luke doesn't tell us the top to bottom bit, which is an incredible detail. It's also not just like a linen curtain that you could take if you were really strong or there was a tear in it and you could rip it. It's torn from top to bottom, and think of it more in the range of like a thick duvet. It's thick. It's hard. You're not just going to be able to grab it and rip it like you could like a t-shirt or something. It's not just like a bit of cloth. It's heavy. It's thick, and it's torn from top to bottom, so clearly a really impactful thing. So the temple was torn, and then graves were open, and many bodies of the saints who slept came out of the graves. And they came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into Jerusalem and appeared to many people. That's a really interesting detail in Matthew, and one that is quite striking, the idea that as Jesus dies, and then even as he's resurrected, people are coming back to life and walking around. Not resurrected in the same way, but they are walking around, which is really interesting. Mark has a really, really similar wording and similar account to Matthew, but does not actually have the idea of people coming out of the grave. So he has the temple curtain being torn from top to bottom, and then the centurion saying it is the Son of God. Jesus in John doesn't say, into your hands I commit my spirit, but actually does say the famous line, it is finished, which in Greek is one word. It is tetelestai. It is finished. And that is what he says, and then he gives up his spirit. And then John adds quite a long detail of the notion that Jesus has died, but he's died quite quickly. Crucifixions could take a while, depending on how the person was, especially they're up there, and you don't die. Apologies, this is quite gruesome, but this is the topic at hand. Crucifixion is an incredibly brutal way to die, and I imagine many of you throughout your years of listening to sermons and being in church have heard some variations of the details of crucifixion. It's a really, really horrible way of execution. It's not a quick way of executing people. And so for the Romans, the way of executing through crucifixion was not about efficiency. It was not the way they would pick to kill people if they just wanted to kill people. It was humiliating. It was torturous. It was one of the most painful ways that they could conceive of to die, in a public spectacle, hanging naked up on a cross for people to watch you for hours. And then they would leave people on crosses generally for quite a while, just as a spectacle. But you don't die from crucifixion from loss of blood. You die from suffocation, because eventually your lungs fill with fluid and you will eventually suffocate. And so you have to, as you're hanging, kind of pull yourself up to get a breath, and then you slowly tire out until you asphyxiate or whatever way. And you could die from a few different things that are going on to your body during this horrible experience. But it could take quite a while. And so it's Friday, and they're going to crucify them. And for the Jews, they didn't want the bodies around, especially not there by the city during Passover. And so they want to get the bodies off the cross. And so here, what they're going to do, as John recounts, is speed the process up a bit. Because remember, I talked about you have to lift yourself up to breathe. And so they're going to go and hurry the process along so they can get the bodies down and get them away before sunset, which is when the Sabbath begins and you can't do any work. And then you got to leave the bodies up there till Sunday. And they don't want to do that. And so they're going to go and break their legs in order to hurry the process up. Because if your legs are broken, you can't lift yourself up and you can't get a breath and then you die sooner. To put it really, really brutally. And so John has, the soldiers came. So it says, the Jews, therefore, because it was the day of preparation, so again, Friday, they asked that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath day. And they asked Pilate to have the legs broken of the three being crucified, that they might be taken away. Then the soldiers came to break the legs, and they broke the legs of the first and the second person who were crucified alongside of Jesus. And then they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, so they don't break his legs. And then John says this was to fulfill what was said, that not a bone was broken. But he also then has the soldier takes a spear and pierces his side, and comes out blood mixed with water to show that he had probably bled out. His body wasn't working anymore. If he pierces his lung and it's full of fluid could come out. There's lots of medical reasons for this happening, but it basically shows the soldiers come to Jesus to break his legs to speed it up, and he's already dead. And so they stab him with the spear just to make sure. And that confirms to them that he has in fact died. And again, it's brutal, but then it says to fulfill that not a bone was broken, and so you know that it's true, and to fulfill a sort of prophecy. And then it says another prophecy is they will look on him who is pierced. So these couple of details added. And then we have the burial of Jesus. Now, Jesus is dead. He's not been on the cross for very long, but he has, in fact, given up his spirit. He said it is finished. He's had that excruciating experience, and so now God is dead. Now, there was a good and righteous man named Joseph, who, though a member of the council, had not agreed to their plan and action. That's an interesting detail. He came from the Jewish town of Arimathea and was waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God. Joseph of Arimathea is another person mentioned in all four Gospels, so an important character and someone who was known to them. It's not the case of like a couple mention him and others just say a man. He is mentioned by name in all four. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and laid it in a rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath day they rested according to the commandment. So here we have, it's Friday, it's nearing sundown, and when it's sundown they can't do any more work. The women follow where they take the body into the tomb that Joseph of Arimathea has, where they lay Jesus, and the women see where it is, which is, of course, the key detail, because they're the ones who come back. And so they leave to prepare some spices to then bring back on Sunday morning to prepare the body fully for burial, but they've wanted him down off the cross for the Sabbath, and they've laid him in the tomb. He's dead. He's been confirmed dead by the soldiers. They've pierced him with a spear. They didn't need to break his legs. There's no faking. There's no coma. There's no nothing. He's dead. God is dead, and they've laid him in the tomb. This is quite it's such a brutal way to die. And you can see why, as a slight tangent, we have to think about some of these so-called theories of atonement. The Gospels are not theologizing his death so much. I mean, they have Jesus saying it is finished. They have the temple curtain being torn. They have these implications of what's going on between God and humanity. But we don't have asides from Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John saying, and this is what it means when Jesus dies. Paul will do some of it, but um, it is not so clear cut. But what we do know is that all four Gospels are incredibly in sync and accurate with the details surrounding the death of Jesus, especially those sort of 6 hours to 9 hours between noon and sunset when Jesus is laid in the tomb. Thanks for sticking with us and watching, and we'll get to, without spoiling it too much, a bit of a happier conversation next week. So thanks for watching. Have a good week.